Nothing but the recovery of that child can heal the wound. If he could have many other children, that would not do it. Thus it is with me towards you. Nothing but your return to God and the church can heal this wound. He pressed on faithfully, feeding his flock in expository preaching, in and out, in and out. Beginning in April 1790, he preached successively through Psalms, Isaiah, Joel, Amos, Hosea, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Daniel, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Genesis, Matthew, Luke, John, Revelation, Acts, and 1 Corinthians up to chapter 4, verse 5. The people in his church, little church, did not seem, history is nice sometimes, to begrudge their pastor's wider ministry. For the Missionary Society, a young deacon wrote 2 weeks before Fuller's death, as they saw he was almost gone. He wrote this in his diary. "What a loss as individuals and as a church we are going to sustain. Him that has so long fed us with the bread of life, that has so affectionately, so faithfully, so fervently counseled and exhorted and reproved and animated by doctrine, by precept, by example, the people of his charge, him who has lived so much for others, shall we no more hear his voice?" So if that was representative, the people had a large affection for him in spite of his inadequacies as an overworked pastor. When he was home from his travels, it was one form of work for another. His wife, Anne, he married again in 1794, Anne Coles. His wife, Anne, told him that he had allowed no time for recreation. And Fuller answered, "Oh no, all my recreation is change of work." His son Gunton, 1815, just a few months before his death, said that he was still working, quote, "upwards of 12 hours a day," close quote. And woven into all of that faithful, persevering, pastoral, missionary, writing labor, making his perseverance all the more astonishing, was the suffering and the loss that he endured. 8 children died. His first wife died July 10, 1792, just before she died. He wrote, "My family afflictions have almost overwhelmed me. What is yet before me I know not. For about a month past, the affliction of my dear companion has been extremely heavy." And then, July 25, "Oh my God, my soul is cast down within me. The afflictions of my family seem too heavy for me. O Lord, I am oppressed. Undertake for me." And then she died, August 23, 1792, having lost 8 of her children. And he wrote these lines for her, a little poem. The tender parent wails no more her loss, nor labors more beneath life's heavy load. The anxious soul, released from fears and woes, has found her home, her children, and her God. So there's the personal, pastoral, missionary context of Fuller's engagement with spiritual and doctrinal errors of his day. For all of his activism, and he was very, very activistic, it was his controversies, his doctrinal writing controversies that did the most to unleash or prepare a platform for the unleashing of the missionary movement. And that's what I want to focus the rest of our time on. He was, as one biographer said, preeminently the thinker. No movement can go far without a thinker. So among the particular Baptists, the Calvinistic Baptists of his day, he was the preeminent thinker. And so this author and I am tracing the rise of the William Carey wave of the modern missionary movement to Andrew Fuller's thinking. His intellectual labors as a pastor to confront Hyper-Calvinism and Sandemanianism. They weren't the only two. You could add Socinianism. I mean, this man was battling on front after front after front. Only what I hope you'll take away is these battles were not the least ingrown. They were global in their impact. His heart burned that there be a heart for missions and a gospel for missions. And wherever he saw errors that would compromise that, that's where he took up battle. We do have this book in the bookstore. I recommend it. I read it right through. These are his letters. It's called The Armies of the Lamb, The Spirituality of Andrew Fuller. A great flavor. So if you just want a short paperback flavor of the man, go ahead and pick that up. I recommend it to you. And then if you have $120 to spare, you can go to Amazon or someplace and get the 3 volumes. So my aim now is to describe for you this pastor's engagement with these 2 deadly errors of his day. One called High Calvinism. We call it Hyper-Calvinism. He used the word hyper a few times I saw, but mainly it's almost always High Calvinism. And the other is Sandemanianism, which I'll explain when we get there. And in both cases, the battles were distinctively exegetical and doctrinal, even though their important outcomes were experiential and globally practical. Now, this thinking, this engagement didn't come out of nowhere. You've read enough history to know nobody comes out of nowhere. He came out of his century with manifold influences. I'll mention a few. Besides the one I referred to from Neil, the cool, rational 18th century, we're talking about David Hume, Britain, Rousseau, France, Tom Paine, America. These were the vintage, secular, cool, rational, philosophic killers of evangelical thought, which dominated the intellectual life of the 18th century. That's what Stephen Neal was talking about. How in the world did that produce William Carey? Well, they didn't. But there was another thing happening, and you know what it is. It was George Whitefield and John Wesley and Jonathan Edwards. That's the other thing that was going on during the 18th century. And Fuller was deeply immersed in the Great Awakening. Writings coming over from Jonathan Edwards and Whitefield and Wesley, crisscrossing the nation, and Fuller being born in the prime of all that in 1754. The particular Baptists that he was born into did not like any of those people. Wesley, of course, was not a Calvinist. That's his problem. Whitefield's Calvinism was very suspect because he was so indiscriminate in his evangelistic preaching. They complained of his Arminian dialect. I remember the first message I ever gave after coming to the Baptist General Conference, 1980, I think it was, Omaha, Nebraska. And I preached at an assembly about this size on Hebrews 6. And a man